On Friday of this past week, I was all set to lead a graveside service for a family member, for my aunt's sister through marriage. Now, she had died over 2 years ago, but her illness was fast and sudden and painful, and everything that happened all took place in the height of COVID and COVID lockdowns and all of those complications. And really, the family has been reeling for the past couple of years, and really only now felt ready to gather to inter her ashes and to celebrate her life. As I was preparing to go to the graveside for the service, we got a call from the nursing home where my husband's 97-year-old grandmother lives to tell us that she had taken a turn for the worse and that they were looking at palliative care measures. Now, she's 97, but up until a few weeks ago, she was known at her nursing home as the Roadrunner. And all of a sudden, she was leaving us. So I went from the graveside service to her bedside to spell my husband off, to sit with her and help her settle and assure her that she could be at peace and that she could leave when she was ready. And she died in the early morning of Saturday. There was a quotation that I had been living with all week as I was preparing for the graveside service on Friday, and it continued to live with me all weekend. It's from one of the great Christian mystics, John of the Cross, and he has this to say: "I saw the river over which every soul must pass to reach the kingdom of heaven. And the name of that river was suffering. And I saw a boat which carries souls across the river. And the name of that boat was love." There's a river named Suffering. There's a boat called love. And the destination is the kingdom of heaven. Now, you can probably hear in these words why this quotation would come to me in considering the end of someone's life. But it's not just in death that these words of John of the Cross have something to say to us. These words have something to say for us here today as we celebrate the new journey of Katharina and Lucas in the life of baptism. And they have something to say to us no matter what point we're at on our journey of faith. Jesus is really clear throughout his entire life and ministry that the kingdom of heaven is not just a reality that awaits us when we breathe our last. It's not just about life after death. It's also very much about the here and now of life before death. What Jesus invites us to do with all that he has and all that he is he invites us to keep our eyes open for where the kingdom of heaven, where the power, the presence, the purpose, the love of God is breaking into our world, breaking into our lives, breaking into our human lives and this physical world in order to meet us and greet us and accompany us. And the invitation that Jesus issues to us is to be attentive, to be expectant for how God is showing up. And not just to be expectant, but also to be ready to participate, to be participants in how God's love is at work in our lives and at work in the life of the world. Now, today's service, we began with the waters of baptism. And then we hear a gospel passage that also very much features the water. We might think, in fact, of the water as being a main character in the life and ministry of Jesus. So much of what he does, so much of his ministry takes place along the shores of the lake, takes place in fishing boats, takes place as they are making their journey from one shore to the next, as the ministry and witness of Jesus unfolds. Here in this gospel passage, we once again come to the water. And I'm going to invite you, as we explore this gospel passage today, to look out for where our gospel today resonates with these words of John of the Cross, where we hear this connection with the river of suffering, with the boat of love, and with the destination, which is the breaking in of the kingdom of heaven. This gospel passage, in order to give some context, follows right immediately on the heels of the miracle that we looked at last Sunday that Reverend Alan McLean helped to open up for us with such wisdom and insight. The feeding of thousands of people with just a couple loaves and fish. This story takes place right after that. And like last week's story, Jesus is just really trying to get some time alone. Last week's story opened with the murder of John the Baptist by King Herod. And Jesus really needs to take some time to process what has happened, to grieve his cousin who has died, and to figure out what this means for him in his own public and very dangerous ministry. Last week, when he was trying to get this time alone, he was inundated with the crowds, which led to this miraculous surprise picnic with the loaves and fish. We hear this gospel passage continue with Jesus once again trying to take some alone time, and so he sends his disciples on their way on to the next destination, and Jesus goes by himself to pray. But lo and behold, his disciples get into trouble on the waters. The waters and the skies can be unpredictable, and all of a sudden they find themselves in the midst of a raging storm. They have no idea how they're going to get through, and they cry out in help. And Jesus responds. Jesus leaves his solitude to come walking to them miraculously on the water. Peter is in the boat. He's one of Jesus' closest disciples, and Peter has a very Peter moment, which is this moment of blustery self-confidence. He gets out of the boat, he starts walking toward Jesus on the water, and all is going really well until he realizes just how impossible this all really is, and he starts to sink, he starts to drown, and he calls out to Jesus, "Save me." And Jesus, I think with a bit of a smile, but a ton of compassion, reaches out to Peter, grasps him by the hand, pulls him out of the drowning water, and gets him back into the boat. Last week's miracle, I have to imagine, would have been met by all of Jesus' followers and his disciples with a certain kind of joy, because they're hungry and Jesus feeds them. What could be better than that? This miracle this week seems to meet them with trepidation, with fear, with a sense of all of a sudden the penny drops and they realize who Jesus really is. Because who has lordship and dominion over the waters, over the skies, over the seas, but God, the creator of all? This story of the raging seas harkens us back to the very opening of the Bible, to the first book of the Bible, Genesis, where God the Creator calls all that is into being. God shapes the seas and molds the heavens. God commands the elements and they obey. Jesus makes this connection with God the Creator all the more explicit when Jesus responds to their fear. And we lose something in the English translation, but basically what Jesus says is, don't be afraid. It is, I am. Jesus uses that same turn of phrase that is used by God in the burning bush to speak to Moses back in the book of Exodus, when Moses says, "Who are you?" And God replies, "I am." God is the source of all that is. God is the ground of our whole being. God is the one who calls everything that is into existence. And Jesus walks across the stormy, turbulent waves and is revealed as the embodiment of the Creator of all, the embodiment of God of the universe. This is a really interesting contrast that we have in this gospel passage, because essentially what we get to see in this gospel passage is we get to see Jesus first at his most human. We get to see Jesus bound to us in our heartbreak, in our loss, in our sorrow, in our need. And then we also get to see Jesus at his most divine, revealing to us the breaking in of God's kingdom, revealing in his own body the purpose and the presence and the love of God meeting us in the storms of life. And we see Jesus reaching out across all that threatens to overwhelm and drown us in order to take us and hold us close and help us get back into the boat. Katharina and Lucas are both at the very outset of their journey, the very beginning of their journey. Like all of us, they are at times in their lives going to know what it feels like to be caught in the storms of life. They're going to know what it is to feel overwhelmed, lost, alone, broken, unsure of where to turn. It's really tempting in those moments where we can feel most fearful and most lost. It's really tempting to think that we have to go it alone. It's really tempting to feel like maybe going it alone is the safest thing to do. Like maybe what we need to do is just concentrate on our own survival, on getting ahead ourselves. Just be a little selfish, a little self-centered, and kind of distant from everybody else. But baptism offers us a different choice. That choice starts with God's choice, not with ours. It starts with God's choice. And we see that choice of God very much in the forefront of this gospel passage. God's choice is not to be some distant, remote, armchair deity looking down at creation with mild disinterest. God's choice is to meet us in the storms of life. God's choice is to come to us across the waves. God's choice is to reach out to us always, forever, unconditionally. Not if, but no matter what. God is always there to meet us, to reach out to us. and to reach out to us with unconditional love. Baptism is God's choice for us as beloved children of God. But baptism also offers us the opportunity to respond to God's choice. To respond to God's choice with our own choice. With our own choice to throw our lives into the boat with Jesus. To know that getting into that boat with Jesus is the way of fully living the life that we were created to live. We're not created to go it alone. We're not created for selfish, self-centered self-interest. We're created for relationship. We're created for this relationship of love. We're created to know and love and serve God with all of our hearts, and we're created to know and love and serve God in how we love one another and embrace one another with loving care. We're created to make the journey across the stormy waves in the boat of love. And it is true that there is no way of loving without also knowing loss and suffering. Because we're trying to love other people who are fragile and vulnerable and make mistakes and don't live forever. Just like we're fragile and vulnerable and we make mistakes and don't live forever. There's no way of loving without suffering. But there's also no way of getting anywhere that matters without loving. Baptism offers us that choice to get in the boat with Jesus, into that boat of love, to make our journey across the stormy waves. Baptism also gives us the opportunity to remember that that most basic prayer is always going to be answered. We hear that basic prayer in our gospel passage today, and it's just this: save me, help me. We are promised that God is always going to respond to us when we cry out for help. So that's also what we're here in this baptismal life to do, is to help one another, to watch attentively, expectantly for how God does show up in the storms of life, how God does come to us across the turbulent waves, how God does reach out to us with love, to take us by the hand, to hold us close, and to help us get back into that boat. Amen.